Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anu Dathan. I'm a policy manager at the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, or JPAL. We're really excited to be hosting this webinar today, which will focus on research and policy to combat bias and discrimination in hiring and in the workplace more broadly. So in terms of structure for today, we'll kick off with Professor Marianne Bergtrand, who is a labor economist and the Crispy Dialinas Distinguished Service Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. So she'll give kind of an introduction and overview for the session, and then we'll turn it to a panel discussion that Marianne will moderate that will feature three experts in the space. So they are Luke Levin, who's the Director General of the Research Department at the European Central Bank, Kati Sundaram, who's the CEO of the tech company Applied, and Chinmaya Kumar, who's a PhD student at the University of Chicago. So we'll hear a little bit more about their work in the space and where they think more needs to be done. And then finally, I wanted to highlight that we will be leaving time at the end for audience Q&A, so please feel free to leave your questions in the chat and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. And then finally, just as a quick heads up, you'll also notice that the session is being recorded and we'll be making the recording available afterwards so that you can share it with any colleagues who were unable to make it. But yeah, thank you again so much for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marianne Bergtrand.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Anu, and thanks, Luke, Kati, and Chinmaya for being here with us today. Luke, especially, we know that you have COVID, so thanks so much for doing this. So let me just start with a brief set of introduction. This is hosted, this webinar is being hosted by JPAL. For those of you that are in the webinar don't know about JPAL, so JPAL is a research organization that is based at MIT. And the goal of the organization is to empower policymakers with rigorous evidence. So we have a network of about 500 researchers spanning all continents. And we do randomized control trials. So since beginning, I think JPAL has done more than 1,000 RCTs. And importantly, the work is not just simply about research, but it's really about trying to make sure that policymakers have access to this research, know about it, and can really use it to try to engage in policies that are going to be more effective. Just reach out if you want to hear more about JPAL independently, either to me or to Anu. So in terms of these particular webinars, so this is the third in a series that may be going on that is really focused on an anti-bias, anti-discrimination agenda that has always been, implicitly part of JPAL, but never explicitly. And we are very, very eager to get more researchers to work on questions of discrimination and bias, and as well as getting more policymakers, firms, recruiters to think seriously about how to engage in practices that are creating opportunities for all. In terms of background, I'll just start going back to my own kind of research history, and it's been nearly 20 years, and it's scary to say that. Joined with my friend and colleague Sandor Mulenathan, we used a randomized control trial to document the extent to which there is discrimination in hiring among large employers in the US. It's been, of all the work that I've done, I think one of the most impactful, if only by looking at the amount of people that have taken this research method and have applied it to other contexts, other countries, and have also documented the extent of discrimination and bias in these other places, as well as people that have kept on leveraging this research agenda to tell us more about where the discrimination is. I have particularly in mind here a very, very important recent paper by Pat Klein, Evan Rose and Chris Walters that shows exactly which large firms in the US are really systematically discriminating. Also have in mind other works that points to some of the psychological mechanisms that may be behind the bias, such as showing us a lack of attention of minority candidates is one of the problems that we should be trying to solve as we think about better practices. Now, with that context aside, I think it's very, very clear that there's more that needs to be done. And I will stress, that beyond simply measuring biases, measuring its existence, we really need more work about how to seriously combat it. And the goal of this particular webinar today is really focus on discrimination and in the workplace, in hiring, but more generally in the workplace. As I said, it is a third of 3 webinars. The first one really, kind of featured the cross-disciplinary approaches that is needed to think about bias, where we combine social psychologists, kind of people that focus on computers and AI and economists to think about these topics. The second one was really showing the value of the RCTs and showing that things like the contact hypothesis that is often portrayed as one important thing to try to fight bias can really work effectively in the field. So the goal today is just to keep the conversation going. And again, I'm super, super lucky to be joined by Luke, Kyati, and Chinmaya. I'll let them each kind of explain what they do and why they're here, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion. So I'll stop here. Luke, do you want to start?
It will be my pleasure. Thanks so much, Marianne, and also Anna for organizing this. Yeah, indeed, I have COVID. I hope my voice will stay with me for the next hour. But I really didn't want to miss this webinar. I'm very pleased to be part of it. So what I wanted to do is I have done a research project at my organization, the European Central Bank. I wanted to first talk a bit about that, and then about some of the lessons we took from that and some measures that were put in place at this organization. And then I will end with what I think are some takeaways, maybe some good practices also in other places, although I think it's hard to sort of extrapolate from one place to others, but I'll do my best. So what I studied with colleagues is the career progression of economists, so only economists, at the European Central Bank. And this is a central bank covering 19 different European countries. And as a manager, when I joined this organization, I was wondering what explains the lack of women, especially in leadership positions, and what could be done about it. So the way we went about it is a very different approach than JPAL. So we didn't do a randomized controlled experiment. We actually collected the real data, the confidential personnel data from human resources. And what this data also has is information on promotion application and decisions. So to get higher up in the organization, you need to apply for a promotion, and then you're interviewed. And so we had 2 major findings in this work. One is not too different from other studies. There's a wage gap between men and women, not on hiring, but it grows a few years from hiring. And this is quite striking because hiring seems to be that, it's mostly PhD economists. You start with the same salary level. So education, background, it's all seems to be the same, but yet in this kind of very similar environment, you see some wage gap. And what we can point this to is basically it's almost exclusively driven by lack of promotion by women. So this promotion gap is really quite striking. And so the second finding is that if you look at what drives this promotion gap, it's not that women apply and then get turned down. It's not that form of bias or discrimination. It's actually the other way around. Is women don't apply for promotion as often as men do. And that really bothered us, and we tried to understand after this study what could cause this. Basically, we did a lot of interviews and talking to women, and it's a sort of a mix of preferences, but preferences are often coming with social norms. So it's like, well, I'm not ready yet. This is not a good time for me. I'm still on very important other assignments, or this other colleague who deserves this promotion more, or I'm busy with other things. Another story we hear often is that what I call sort of self-fulfilling expectations is that it's just what is sort of expected in general. it's sort of, this is the way it has been. And the third one is that the idea that following promotions would come with more responsibility, and not clear what this would mean and how to deal with that. And again, am I ready for that? So a lot of questions. And turning to men, the men often don't seem to have those questions. Basically, they, the day they're promoted, they're ready for the next promotion, sort of the other way around. So some measures we have then taken at the ECB, some were more effective, I think, than others. But first we looked at childcare benefits. A lot of other research has pointed that the absence thereof may shy women away from seeking more responsibility. Now, I have to say, I mean, I expect this is a broad global audience. In Europe, and especially in Germany, where this institution is located, childcare benefits are generally quite generous, at least as far as women are concerned. So 12 to 18 months parental leave. There was no parental leave for men, though. So now also parental leave for fathers was introduced, and daycare facilities for newborns. So the daycare facilities were there, but only for children above 12 months. And so basically offering more options there. Now, turning to the applicants, I think what was more powerful was assertiveness training was offered to all the staff members. Basically getting people ready to apply, and on the other side, on the hiring manager side, bias trainings were not offered but were mandatory. And I went through those myself. I've gone through them at every organization I've worked for, I think 5 times now, and every time I learned something about myself. I think the most powerful one was a mentorship program, where every woman who is within sort of the normal trajectory of the next step for promotion is assigned a mentor. This doesn't always work at the first instance, so there's sort of a trial and error, but we've gotten very positive feedback from that. And then the last thing that sort of goes with this mentorship program is it's not enough to just have a program. I mean, in my own experience as a manager, it's really it's getting women ready for the next step also requires taking them all the way to the interview stage. So it's an additional push. It's being proactive. So encourage them to apply, check if they have indeed applied. Often there are sort of excuses, or, as I said, often I hear, well, I'm busy, I don't think I will be able to do this interview well, so I'd rather not do the interview, I pass up on an opportunity. So help them prepare for the interview, basically take away assignments, reassign them to others so they can actually properly prepare, free up the schedule. And the last thing that happened at the ECB, but that was more by luck, struck of luck, is we got a female boss. So of course it's easier to lead by example if the boss changes the gender, basically. Now, I think a healthy dose of humility here is of course in order. I think it's hard to say which of these combinations works best. You need to experiment, try all of the above. But at least in the data, the study that we did, after all these measures were put in place, if you look before and after, a big part of this bias disappeared. And what are we doing currently? Currently, we are looking at different aspects of diversity and inclusion. We consider a third gender option because the study that we did, there were only 2 gender options in the data. And this is possible now in Europe, and indeed Germany was the first European country that allowed such a third option. But we also look at other types of diversity where so far the data were limited. So yeah, in terms of, I think, good practices for me, it's these two things: mentoring and proactive management on the manager side within organizations. And then I think it can go a long way. You don't have to sort of wait for quota to be imposed and things like that. I think you have to start from within. And this can help to encourage women to apply. And in terms of increasing the applications, what I've also worked on is at the ECB. I'm very proud that I initiated a scholarship for women. So this is not only focusing on women that are already within the organization, but encouraging more women to go study the type of fields that we are interested in particular economics and STEM. This week I'm actually doing 46 interviews of highly talented women. Unfortunately, we can only grant them to Europeans. And I hear the life story because we look also for financial hardship or at least need. And it's always amazing to see how much talent there is among young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. This was really, really inspiring. I think we'll just do each of the panelists, and then I'll have, have quite a few questions for you. Katie, would you mind going next? And thank you again for, for being here with us today.
Thanks, Marianne. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Kyati Sundaram. I'm the CEO of Applied. Thanks for having me here again. It's a topic that's very close to me, so really excited to participate here. I can bring my experiences from running Applied for the last 3 years. Applied is a tech solution to this very wide social complex problem of bias in hiring and in workplace. And I can also bring my personal experiences with hiring bias, given that my journey is very nonlinear, which lends itself to bias in many ways. So let me start with Applied. Our bread and butter at Applied is evidence-driven empirical hiring and also ethical hiring. So when I say ethical, how do you make it fairer? How do you make it data-driven, highly accountable, highly robust? And it's those two pillars that we're trying to bring into the real world. At Applied, I would say that we are fortunate that having used a great process and a great data-driven approach, we hire everyone using the same process, the same technology solution, and we're a majority women, majority non-binary company from our leadership team to our junior teams. So it is a testament to the fact that when people say pipeline is an issue when you don't have enough women in STEM or with enough ethnic minorities in STEM, I can combat that by saying if we do the right process is a bigger issue. That's what we need to combat today. And yes, pipeline is a longer, slower burn, but we can all come together to combat the process in hiring today, which can have genuine impact. So we've already talked about lots of the research that exists from academia, and I won't go into that, but that's over 4 decades of research. What we have done at Applied is supplemented that with our own research over the last 4 years. We've now had 500,000 candidates through this technology platform who are applying for jobs. This is across the globe, so we can talk through experiences of United States, UK, Australia, Europe. And we've hired almost 12,000 people into the workforce. Most of them we know wouldn't have got access to those economic opportunities because their CV would have gone in the bin because they are highly nonlinear, they don't sound and look the part. They would never get the jobs that we have been able to get them to. And we'll talk about the process and how we do that. But I'm only starting to scratch the surface here and talk about what impact we can create now. And how we do that is a smaller piece of that, but I still want to talk a little bit about the impact we are creating. So we talk a lot about hiring women in counter-stereotypical roles, like STEM roles, and using Applied. Solely Applied, no quotas in place with the organizations that we work for, and we work for and with about 250 to 300 organizations across the globe. No quotas in place. Most of the companies have been able to increase their women hires in counter-stereotypical roles by 2 to 4 times. So think STEM, technology, engineering, all of these kinds of roles. Same goes for ethnic minorities. They've been able to increase their hires by 1.5x. And these are without quotas, without imposing that forcing function. And that's really, really important to understand, because that has a social dynamic with it as well. And at Applied, what I am really passionate at looking is how do we relate a hiring process to the outcome post-hire. So what we deeply care about is the quality of the match. Many, many hiring products out there don't care about the quality of the match. They're either only looking at short-term diversity, so probably gives you quotas, etc., or they're looking at some other kind of facet of the hiring process, such as speed. And what we are doing at Applied is we optimize for the quality of the match and make sure it's highly robust. What that does is people end up being hired who don't look the part, who don't sound the part, who often happen to be from a completely different walk of life. And because we've been able to match that person really well to the job, they stay longer. So our retention rates for people in the STEM sector, across technology companies or publishing or construction, it's through the roofs. So we are beating UK benchmarks over the last 3 years by actually matching people to these jobs, and they stay in the jobs and they thrive in the jobs. And that's really, really important. For me, it's not about just getting diverse talent in, it is making sure they stay and retain, and as Luke said, get promoted and thrive in the job. So it's matching that entire line of puzzle, if you will. So that's the impact. How we do it is, I will say it's simple, not really simple in practice, but simple theoretically. The two problems we see and we combat is, the first problem is most of the world is hiring not on data. They're hiring on some kind of metrics, arbitrary or otherwise, which are mostly time to hire. Most hiring teams are rewarded or optimized for time to hire. How long does it take you to fill a seat? When you only look at that metric and no other metric, everything else starts breaking. And that's I think, going back to your concept, Marianne, of attention, paying attention to that pipeline and paying attention to that funnel. People don't have that time. We've now worked with hundreds and thousands of hiring managers. They don't have that time. So how do you provide a system that enforces that guardrails them against that bias? So that's the first problem. Most of the world doesn't have the data. They don't have the right tools. And it's about standardizing that process, providing the tools. And the second piece of the problem, which is flip side of the same coin, is the data they do have is really, really noisy. So 99% of the world is screening using CVs, resumes, LinkedIn profiles. And what happens straight after is, if you sound and look the part, you go onto an interview call or a first screening call, and you still have to sound and look the part, and then you get to the main call. And that is again related to the data you use is your name, your gender, probably where you have gone to school, how long you've worked for. So if I'm an engineer at Google for 4 years, I'm great, I will be called for an interview. Nobody tests for whether I would be a rubbish engineer at Google, which I could have been. And nobody's tested me for that before calling me for the interview. And if I'm really bad in the interview, it's wasted time in the screening. And so we're missing the entire piece of, are we really screening bad hires through, and we're getting people into the interview stage that we shouldn't be getting at all, so false positives. And so those two elements combined, the lack of data and then actually having the wrong data, those combine to make catastrophic problems in the practical world. And that's why Applied exists. It exists to bridge the gap between what organizations are actually doing and what research suggests we should be doing. And all our studies within Applied as well, we worked with organizations to build our own research over the last 4 years. It suggests that we can build a technology solution which enables a debiased process, and it can make the entire hiring process more predictive, more ethical, more robust. And it's about driving systematization. It's about driving accountability and robustness for all organizations. I'll stop there because there's a lot of heavy things in there, but we can talk about it later.
Thanks so much. I'll definitely follow up with a few questions on the entire, kind of the entire process. Make sure that everybody, kind of has a full picture of all the hard work that goes into your model. Chinmaya, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Well, great to be part of this webinar, and excited about talking about some of the results of one of my research that I've been doing for last many years. Supposed to finish it in 2020, but thanks to COVID, I've been working on it for almost 2 years now. So I think the main motivation for my research is also similar to some of the sort of points Luke was making, where like sort of women or minority groups in general are underrepresented in managerial positions or even enterprise ownership. So say if we take a country like India and we look at the organized sector, so there, say, like women are only 3% of the CEOs, for instance, only 10% of the board members. And if we look at the informal sector, which constitutes the large majority, so there also the enterprise ownership, women, only 10% of women own the sort of enterprises. If we look at the lower caste populations, they own around 8%, although their population share is around 17%. So huge underrepresentation of minority groups in enterprise ownership and managerial positions. So wanted to understand why, and of course there could be many reasons why this is the case, but my research focuses on one particular channel, and the idea here is to understand whether minority population face discrimination from below. So essentially some sort of penalty in labor market. So basically whether employees have preference over employers. So if they try and avoid minority employers or minority managers, then this is going to be very costly in sectors where hiring is important and it's like a labor intensive industry. And same for sort of managers, like minority managers may not move up the ladder if they are not receiving cooperation from their subordinates. And this hasn't been sort of studied much, partly because of the power hierarchy. So managers or the enterprise owners often are like more powerful, and we just assume that subordinates won't be able to, or the workers won't be able to do much. But that's not the case in a lot of labor pools, which is dominated by this sort of advantage groups or dominant groups. And I want to provide some preliminary findings of my research on this topic. So in order to really understand whether discrimination from below is a real force in like real field setting, I set up a sort of small experiment where, and this is, these results are from the pilot that I ran. The real experiment is still happening, so don't have much on that. So what I did was to sort of collaborate with some of the real employers, and then I experimentally varied the name of manager. So, and this is amongst the entry-level workers. So somebody who wants to do a phone survey or a data entry work, supervisor or the manager, he plays a critical role in deciding how that person, the sort of assessing the performance and the pay and everything. So we experimentally, so we provided the name of manager, and we had like multiple managers of different minority and non-minority sounding name. And we varied this job description page while advertising for the position of these entry-level workers. And then we compare the pool of applicants who applied for different jobs. And what I found was the sort of minority managers do face a lot of discrimination in the type of applicants they receive. So for instance, religious minority groups in India, so Muslim, for instance, received around 30% lower number of applicants. And when I looked at the quality of the applicants, that was also much worse for the sort of Muslim employer group or Muslim manager group, to be sort of precise. And I also looked for lower caste women, and they also face a penalty. They also attract lower number and quality of applicants, although the magnitude of effects are a bit smaller. And this is from a small pilot. We had around 1,000 applicants. So I'm doing something similar at a bigger scale. But preliminary evidence does suggest that discrimination from below cannot be ignored. So there could be sort of penalty that they are paying. And the next step is to really understand one, like what are the underlying motivations for this kind of discrimination? And there I'm going beyond this like taste versus statistical discrimination that sort of economists are usually obsessed with, because I feel there are like so many other determinants of or other sort of underlying motives for discrimination. For instance, one particular channel that I'm interested in is so there could be like belief-based discrimination or test-based discrimination, but it's also possible that people are just like adhering to certain social norm and they're discriminating to tell others, or discriminating because they feel that their sort of peers or like other individuals in the reference group is going to judge them, may not interact them. So some kind of fear of social disapproval could be, and this is something anecdotally we all know sort of shapes our decision, but it hasn't been studied. So my sort of experimental design, the main experiment that I'm hoping to run, would be able to sort of provide some evidence on this. And it's important to sort of uncover this underlying motivation because the policy implications are huge. So then it's not about de-biasing one particular individual. So that person may not be prejudiced against it, but it's just like fearful that other individuals in the reference group are going to sort of, there would be some sort of possible social sanction. And if that's the fear which is driving their behavior, then addressing that kind of discrimination, if the underlying motive is like a fear of social sanction, would require a completely different policy solution than what we often propose. So just wanted to give out an example. Don't have any sort of evidence on this particular channel yet. And then idea is to also understand. So there are like two ways in which discrimination from below can manifest. So one is, of course, the job application behavior, the selection stage. So maybe the good type are not applying to work for minority. And second could be the post-hiring discrimination. So conditional on working, maybe they're less cooperative. So because a lot of sort of audience here is from sort of a research community, I'll just give one quick example. So for instance, a lot of like JPAL projects or field research in general requires doing primary survey, and we have a research associate who is hiring enumerators or at least managing the survey, and then you have large number of field enumerators, and research associate is a leader. And in this setting, it happens, and say in India and many other places, the survey enumerators come from sort of a dominant group. So in India, for instance, like often upper caste Hindu male, who constitute large number of these enumerators. And imagine having a sort of a female RA or other sort of RA from other minority group. And if she is not receiving the same set of cooperation, and there are a lot of anecdotal stories around it, would be very difficult for that RA to run a successful survey. And if the RA's performance is judged on the basis like how efficiently she was able to run a project, maybe the sort of top manager, PIs are not biased, they are just looking at hard numbers to assess the performance. But if there is discrimination from below, it could affect the sort of the final decision. So that's why I think, I mean, it's too early for me to talk about policy implications, but based on whatever little findings, so if discrimination from below or like employees discrimination is a real thing, then maybe one has to sort of sensitize the top management in an organization to not, and when one is thinking about like promotion decision or assessing the performance of managers to and minority managers, especially, it's important to consider that they may face discrimination from below. And one cannot rely totally on, say, workers' evaluation or the overall performance if team productivity is the only sort of measure that one is looking at. So these processes are also important. So, and then second is about like the match quality, and I think Kathy also sort of mentioned it. And if discrimination from below exists, often employers, what they do is to sort of reach out to a private recruiter, or they maybe start using name which is not neutral and is not like minority sounding. And this might work in some circumstances, but it comes with this risk that, you attract good quality worker, but once they figure out that this enterprise is owned by minority, or if they have to work for sort of a minority manager, maybe they would leave quickly, or they are not going to provide a lot of sort of the same level of effort, for instance.
Thanks.
So there could be a trade-off. So one has to sort of really sort of dig deeper, maybe collect more evidence around it, like, yeah, how does one go about addressing discrimination from below? And yeah, and
Thanks.
maybe I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to make sure that we have time for questions, but kind of really fascinating work, and I think a very underexplored a topic. And somebody in a comment kind of talked about issues related to identity, and I think that was very much a theme in your presentation, and also I think a theme in Luke's presentation when he talked about kind of the power of social norms and how kind of these kind of female kind of economics preferences might be shaped by the social environment. I had a few follow-up questions, and I'm really going to take the perspective of the researcher here, trying to think about how we can leverage research for for more change. So Luke, what I understood that you described, you obviously are a researcher yourself, but this felt more like something that you did looking at the data within an organization and really trying to make a difference. You did not set up these changes in a way where you could really, try to understand how you achieved the improvement that you achieved. Can you still say kind of what role did existing research play as you kind of worked through the set of solutions that you guys put in place? I mean, how much did you rely on research for this? How much was it more, kind of doing these interviews with the members of the organization and understanding kind of why they were not applying for promotions? Can you say a bit more about the interplay between, the research that you can rely on for these processes and really working within the organization and trying to achieve change?
Yes, Marianne. Yeah, so I joined this particular organization when they had embarked on some positive change. They had started with sort of the textbook things of quota and really sort of from the top directing this down, but on the ground, nothing much happened. The organization was run by all male board, all senior managers, all my colleagues were men. I inherited a department with 8% women. It was awful. So together with the HR department, that was my strong ally also in providing this data. This was a big deal. I mean, this is confidential data on, I mean, in Germany, this is sort of very close to infringement on privacy, going into people's personnel records. But this was agreed with the staff, with the personnel committee, staff committee, etc. It created, I think, there were two steps. The first step was it created much more awareness of the issue and recognition that we have a problem. Because this is a group almost exclusively as a set of economists, and these are applied economists mostly. They like to see data. They're all very sensitive to discrimination, social norms. They hear all that, but they were like, okay, but where's the evidence and where is the problem? And this one particular problem, because this is a multidimensional issue, and I think that the problem is much deeper. And I think what Kyati and Shemaya were saying about social norms rings true. I think this starts even outside the organization. We interview people. We bring in people from the U.S. economist job market. So whatever discrimination and biases took place already in the educational system, we sort of inherit, and we don't really counter much of that. So we don't see the full gamut of applications even. It's only Europeans that can apply, etc., etc. Anyway, so the first stage was that awareness, and then it was a lot of events that I organized by bringing in other experts, showing other studies, top experts, because I'm not a top expert myself in this field as a researcher. So it was this first stage of raising awareness and recognition there's a problem. And then, as I said, it was trying some of these new measures. And that was not research-based, but it was based on consultations with these experts. And that was led by the HR department, but it was very much this research was the impetus and gave them the conviction and the platform to do something about it. And me as head of the research department and as part of the senior leadership team in a world that had never spoken about this topic, also I think helped for sort of a white male, sort of normally seen as part of the problem, to actually push for this. I think helped, because one thing I've also realized in so many meetings I've had and discussions I've had, I think this is something that too often is being discussed by women, for women only. And I think it is something that we should work on together, everyone, men and women.
Mm-hmm.
I think this webinar is great because it's men and women. And so, yeah, that it was really then trying several things. And so there were many things we tried that didn't work at all. Like there was research from the US suggesting that you need to have gender balanced interview panels. So we actually put some rules in place that at least have the members of interview panels have to be women. We looked at the results of that. We did a lot of follow-up research that didn't produce any results, if anything, maybe to the contrary.
We actually do have evidence that this may sometimes backfire.
Yeah, so there's mixed evidence out there, but we tried that.
Yeah.
So not everything worked, but the mentoring was something that did not really come out of our work directly, but it sort of smelled like that could be something worthwhile trying. And so, I mean, I think for the research crowd on the call, I mean, for me, social norms and practice are so important. It seems to be core of all this, but we don't have a good way of measuring, or at least I don't know how to do it. If you have to, so maybe in sociology I haven't come across, but I think measurement to me is key to convince people.
Mm-hmm.
And then more research on mentoring. I know a lot of management science fields, some in sociology, but again, not so much. Also, a lot of mixed success. The way mentoring is done is very non-transparent. There are a lot of bad experiences. Basically, having courses for, I mean, it's not about mentees, it's also mentors. How to be a good mentor. Yeah. But more research on those topics, I think I would encourage.
That is such an important point. I feel like we all understand mentoring to be important, but we have no idea about how exactly to do it. And there's really a lack of research there. Absolutely.
And maybe last thing, if I may, is so the scholarship program, for which I'm now doing interviews, and by the way, the norms come out, right? So, I mean, yesterday, like a Parisian, this is not India, this is a rich city, Paris, and you hear a heartbreaking story of, so a girl, she has like a poor background, has really made it, like she's top of the class in one of these premier schools in Paris, and then has been told by her parents that they have only money for one of the two children, and the other child is a boy, so they're saving for him to go to university. Or an Italian girl who comes from a farmer's family, and her parents are telling her, well, why don't you even want to walk down the hill to the big university down there? This is not for us. We have never gone to university for centuries. So what I'm saying is this is everywhere around the world, these problems, and it holds people back. And when we put out that scholarship, I mean, we pay for the degree, but really why people are applying is because they also see in small print mentorship program. They want a mentor. They don't want to just have another scholarship. I think that's why I'm saying I'm convinced there's something there, but we need to do it right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kelly, can I you did a really fantastic job kind of describing the impact that Applied has. I want you to spend a bit more time kind of telling the audience about what the model is. And you may kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but I view your model much more into kind of the implicit bias, kind of system 1, system 2, not to use too much jargon thing, then embedded into this issue of social norms. I might be wrong, but could you just describe for the audience how the model works? And then I'm really eager to think about how you've I think you've relied on research to develop the model. Kind of the evidence that you have, on impact, kind of how you, measure this. Do you rely on RCTs? Are you doing other things? And yeah, let's start with that. That's probably already a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start with how the model works, the nuts and bolts, and then we'll go into how we do things. So I think the premise is humans are all bad judges of characters, invariably, and we can't train ourselves to do any better. If you take that premise, and if you believe in that premise, we all need to build and design solutions that will help us take better decisions and take better outcomes, rather than us saying, oh, this individual is biased and let's change them. So that's what we try to do. We give you a system that will prevent you or guardrail you from taking decisions that are catastrophic to the hiring process. And those decisions could be diversity decisions. Those decisions could be, they're people from certain ethnic minorities or certain genders, or anything else that is noisy. If, as I gave the example before, which is one of my favorite examples, if you work at Google, doesn't mean you're a great engineer. You could have been a really bad engineer and just had a good ride because you had a big team and you sat there in a team of 20 people and no one really noticed. So it's about understanding what we are measuring and how we are measuring, and that's what we do. The important thing to note here is it is creating that layer of data that a lot of people don't have. So if I go into the nuts and bolts, we start at the very outset. When candidates apply, we ask them to an equal opportunities form, and that form asks them to disclose several dimensions of their demography, from sex to gender to LGBTQIA affiliations, all of that stuff. And most of the people in our 500,000 candidate applications that we've seen have disclosed it because they understand what we're doing with it. We are not using it to screen hiring decisions. We don't use the model. There is no algorithm in play right now that is screening for human decisions and whether hiring decisions. It is all still done by humans today. What we do is aggregate all that data to understand whether certain parts of the process are working. So for example, our product entails end-to-end hiring, so you can help people write better job descriptions, more inclusive job descriptions. So there's a little bit of algorithms there that make sure you don't use gendered words, for example, and there's a lot of research on that. Then we help you write and test in a way that is more inclusive and that is more skill-based, because we know a lot of tests in the market either have been invalidated, a lot of personality tests, etc., or they have disproportionate impact on minorities. So we have built our own tests, a battery of tests, including skill-based questions, open-ended questions, multiple choice questions, a big library that we have then tested over the 500,000 applications to make sure they're not adding bias and they are better than the status quo. And then the third part is, of course, the interviews, which is where it's really, really difficult to remove all the bias, but we still try and mitigate as much as possible by systematizing the process and structuring the process. But throughout this funnel, we make sure we are collecting data and then surfacing that data back to the hiring manager so they can make an informed decision. So at any given point in the funnel, for example, I could tell you, you asked a certain question in round 3 of your technology hire interviews, half of the Black women dropped out. I can see that, I can show it to you. You can then take an informed decision. Now, bear in mind, a lot of people will not like it because it's highly robust, it's highly accountable, but that's what we are driving towards as the technology solution. For me, it is not just, Applied's job is not just giving the solution, it is also educating the market that there is a problem in the first place. And we try to do both. So that's the nuts and bolts of the product. There, when you say the model, I don't necessarily use the word model all the time because it subsumes that we have algorithms at play all the time. We have some algorithms. None of the algorithms are making a hiring decision. The hiring decision is still with a human today. I won't release any AI or algorithms unless I'm super confident that they're not adding to bias. We know 95% of the algorithms in the market, whether it's keyword search or matching of any kind, is biased because they're not using the right data. And that's why my belief is, how do you make that shift as a society, as hiring teams, from historic data or choosing replication of historic winners, which is probably in the Western world going to be white men, in the Eastern world, in India is going to be men. And so how do you prevent that replication if you just use models to take into account historic data? And that's what we're doing. It's a long journey for us because we're building our models and we're building our data set as we go. So I can't have a model ready unless I have 5 or 10 years of data set build up.
That makes sense. Just kind of just a quick follow-up, and I know we will soon run out of time, and I'm sorry if I didn't keep good time management. How's it like working with kind of with employers? I mean, just and it goes back to like one of the points that Luke was making about even him facing resistance within his own organization from HR to to access the data. As someone that has been working on issues of trying to work on issues of racial and gender bias for a very long time, I've never succeeded in getting any large private organization to to share the data, to even document that there is a problem and get a conversation going about how to test for solutions. So how is it like, how is it like for you? I mean, in terms of how your relationships with employers, HR, how do you kind of how you strike the balance of them willing to share data because you obviously have to see the data. And advice for researchers, I think more generally, that are interested in these questions, interested in testing solutions, but may face the same hurdle that I've certainly faced historically, which is like very few employers want to work with researchers. I mean, how different is it for you? And also kind of questions for Luke on this point. And how can we encourage more organization to be open to researchers so that we can really diagnose problems and really start thinking about testing solutions?
Shall I go first, Marianne?
Sure. First, yeah.
We have seen it is quite mixed. So as you rightly say, the larger organizations sometimes too embedded in their ways. You can't really change them. It is a longer educational journey. So with people who are not really ready or not too advanced in their journey, we have to take a very different approach. It's a little bit of hand-holding, white gloving, and say, fine, you don't want to share the data with us. On an aggregate level, we might call you up in 6 months after the person has been hired, and we'll ask you these questions. Are you okay with it? And then it's just a lot of nudging and hand-holding, which our customer success team does. So it's a little bit of relationship building and a little bit of human rapport building rather than anything else. On the smaller organizations, it's a bit easier. And also there is a spectrum of people who come and work with us who are already much, much advanced in that journey. They understand the problem. They know there is a solution. They just want to buy the solution, get on with it. And those are the people who are easiest to convince to share data because they just want to use the data for the right purpose. And so we have been on a journey with various companies across, but I would say the easiest is find a company that is already far advanced on their journey, understands that there is a problem, understands that they are working on various solutions, and they might be a bit more open on sharing the data. Whereas the larger ones are a bit more embedded in their ways, and it's just hard.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in order to do research, we need more data than often we can find in a small organization. Luke, your sense on this question as well, because I think we're going to need more of that research to move forward on these.
Absolutely. So I think Kat is right. One aspect is trust. I think another is legal. So one reason it was a little bit easier for us to do it internally was that there was a part of the personnel information that we had to take out, the sick leave records, for instance. There were some legal obstacles to that. We've tried to replicate now, because I'm a big fan of replicating studies to see if it's more generalizable. There are 2 other central banks, the Bank of England and the Bank of Spain, that have agreed to replicate the study. And basically, I think one thing that helps is, I mean, the first one is the most difficult, and then you can sort of tell others, okay, but I got the data from this one. Now, I think my most useful tip is that to overcome this trust, is typically easier to work with a researcher, at least some knowledgeable person from inside. So I don't know if you've tried that, but for instance, with the ECB, actually, this is the case for all our data. So you can actually work with the same data I used for any data we have, but you have to work with someone on the other side, basically. And that's simply because certain parts of the data need to be kept confidential, and this is one way to then ensure that. We've tried to have the same study replicated in the US with the Federal Reserve, but there they have, again, legal reasons it cannot be done. And actually, some of these policies that we have put in place are illegal in the US. It would be seen as discriminatory.
The mentoring process?
Mentoring, the Women in Economics Scholarship, or anything that targets only women.
Gender, yes.
Yeah, gender, any direction. So maybe also for some of these questions, maybe the US is not the most fertile ground then.
Yeah, that's possible.
But one question that's come up is on retention. So someone was saying that they would like to hear a little bit more about how we can work with teams and discrimination from kind of beyond the hiring process. And I think this also kind of gets into questions around inclusion within workplaces and what are kind of elements that we could put into place to improve that. I know, Luke, you talked quite a bit about this at the ECB. I don't know if Chinmaya or Khyati, you have any insights from your work to add to this?
Maybe I'll just add a few lines on it. So the research that I'm doing there, one of the outcome variables is like retention. So on the post-hiring discrimination. So once you have like a minority manager, non-minority manager, they have been sort of, you have select a pool of workers, and then we track their sort of on-the-job performance and also how long they sort of stick to a given employer or given manager. We don't have any evidence on it, but there is a possibility that it would be harder for minority managers or employers to retain worker. And there could be trade-off between whether you allow for selection at first stage or not. And these are some of the questions I'm trying to answer. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question that came up, this is, I think, maybe a little bit.
I know, if I may
yeah.
say on this topic,
Sure.
because I think it's really important, flex time, in my experience, is really important. I know, again, some countries, this is not a big thing. The US, this is very much not a big thing. But it's something that increasingly I see as one of the demands. And so being able to work with your staff in terms of whether they want to go part-time, want to spend some time somewhere else, are able to come back, being able to offer that, working wherever they want to work, being output-driven rather than input-driven, all these type of issues.
Thank you so much.